Hey, Peace Psych, here is video number 4 concerning sensation and perception. Vision and hearing tend to be the big senses that humans rely on for their sensation and perception of the world around them. That doesn't make the other senses unimportant, but we're just going to put them all in one happy little video. So let's take a look at smell and taste, which are usually labeled as the chemical senses. Pretty much the only thing you've learned so far in Unit 3 on the brain was that smell or olfaction is the only sense that bypasses that sensory switchboard in the brain known as the, you got it, thalamus. And so let's talk about smells. The accessory structures, your schnoz, right? Your nose, that the smells enter through the little nostrils, or honestly you have a hole in the palate at the back of your mouth. Smells could enter, air molecules could enter that direction as well. Sense of smell is a very basic one. It's not very advanced in humans, and so it's bypassing the thalamus. It's purely chemical. It's going directly to the brain, and we kind of cut out the whole process of having a sensory receptor that converts it to neural activity, in that your olfactory neurons kind of do the whole process of receiving the chemical transducing into neural impulse and sending it directly to the brain. And so they're very special little neurons. On their dendrites, they have receptor areas not for neurotransmitters, but for molecules of odor in the air. They only live about 2 months, and then they are replaced by new ones. And honestly, how they split and make new ones may be the key for neuroscientists to understand how to grow new neurons for brain injuries. Neurogenesis, it has been, as I had said in Unit 3, witnessed occurring in the brain, but so little is understood that maybe these olfactory neurons could help us out in understanding neurogenesis. Remember our sense of smell, not that good, and that you at any given point probably have about 9 million of these olfactory neurons, whereas your good old dog has about 225 million. The olfactory bulb is the place in the brain where the axons of these olfactory nerves send their info, and so it just goes directly there, no thalamus needed. And so smell's still important to talk about, in that it can, affect, our interpretation of things as being good or bad. But also know that our expectations can affect our sense of smell. An example that I think was listed in your textbook was that the wintergreen as a scent tends to be viewed as a pleasant smell by Americans because we tend to associate it with things like gum and candy. But that the Brits view it as a very disgusting smell because they tend to associate it as the primary flavor of medicine in their country. And so, olfaction is still important for sensation and perception. Gustation is your sense of taste, your accessory structure. Stick it out there now. It's your tongue. You can see those little bumps on your tongue are actually your papillae, and those are the structures that are going to kind of channel the chemicals into your taste buds. And so papillae are your sensory receptor, and taste buds are going to be your or taste buds are the sensory receptor, papillae are the accessory structure. The taste when your saliva breaks down food, chemical breakdown occurs. These taste receptors or taste buds respond to specific chemical changes. Like the olfactory neurons, they also reproduce every few weeks. As we age, even though we still get new taste buds, they tend to be less responsive. Once that info is sent to the brain, the thalamus will then route taste to the temporal lobe. So we had the auditory cortex. We talked about that in Unit 3, but know that the temporal lobe also has a cortical region devoted to tastes. So our sensory receptors here, these taste buds, usually can detect things that are sweet, sour, bitter, salty, umami, which is a Japanese word, umami. That's detection of proteins, and so that's why cravings for a big juicy steak, or if you're a vegetarian, a big juicy portobello mushroom. You have sensory receptors that desire that meatiness. And also astringent, which is the best example would be tannins, or a chemical that is found in tea leaves. And so like you might like green tea but not black tea. That might have to do with the different levels of tannins that are in teas and whether or not it tastes too acidic or bitter to you. And just like smell, taste affects our interpretation of things, but our interpretation can also be affected by taste. Or taste, how did I say that? Did I say it backwards? It works both ways, and vice versa. So know that experiments have been done where they tell people that you're about to taste bottles of wine, and they'll actually state the price of the wines. And it's interesting in that your experimental group is actually maybe not actually receiving a sip of a $90 bottle of wine, yet they will always rate that one as being a better quality in taste. And so our expectations that bottom up and top down are always working together to give us the truth of, or maybe not the truth, but how we see the world. All right, and then just remember, sensory interaction, smell and taste are heavily linked. Like when we talk about the flavor of food, we're not talking about taste alone. We're talking about the flavor is taste and aroma of food that give us whether we like or dislike something. Okay, and then the last group of senses to mention are your somatic senses, basic sensations for pressure or touch, temperature for warmth and cold, and pain. We call them the somatic senses because they're not really located in any one organ. Like vision is the eye, hearing is the ear. But the somatic senses are kind of just located throughout our body. And so remember, like the somatic nervous system, right? Soma being Latin for body. So let's talk about sensory receptors. We've got nerves that are lying just below the surface of our skin that are going to send messages to our spinal cord. Little is actually known about how they transduce pressure into neural activity, but we know that we're bombarded with this type of sensory information all the time, and so that's kind of why sensory adaptation occurs. So you find that these senses usually only respond to a change in pressure or touch. This sounds creepy to mention in a YouTube video, but I have clothes on right now. That's good. You don't want a creeper teaching you psych. But I don't really realize that I have clothes on right now. It's like after the first 5 seconds of putting on my clothes this morning, it's like the sensory receptors in my skin grew tired of sending that information to the brain, and the brain frankly grew tired of receiving it. And so these sensory receptors are going to work on recognizing the intensity, right, or the weight of the pressure. And so the heavier a pressure is on you, the more neurons that are firing. And the brain also pays attention to the location of these, like where in the body are they receiving the signal from. And so that lets them know, like, was it a paper cut on your finger or was it you stubbing your toe? It's the location of these sensory receptors in the skin. Okay, kinesthesis, that's sometimes referred to as your sixth sense. I tend to not like to refer to it that way because the majority of people start instantly thinking of, M. Night Shyamalan movies or, like, ooh, ESP, I can read minds. And so we just kind of group kinesthesis into our somatic senses. So when we talk about touch, we just tend to talk about it at the same time. But it's kinesthesis is your sense of position and movement of your own body. And so close your eyes right now. Do this with me. And then move a body part. You can do it, right? And the difference between I'm wiggling my toes right now or I'm wiggling my fingers. There are some people, sadly, that don't have this sense. The medical term for that is proprioception, and so that actually means that they can't move unless they're looking at the body part. They rely on their other senses to give them the indication of movement. So this sounds horribly mean, but you could put this person in a completely dark room and somebody with proprioception would go limp because they couldn't see themselves. Your vestibular sense is a part of kinesthesis. Your vestibular sense monitors your head's position and movement. And so there are fluid-filled canals in your inner ear that have hair cells that send messages to your cerebellum regarding balance and coordination. And so when you spin around, right, it takes a while for that fluid to go back to neutral. So that's why you get feelings of dizziness, or like you spin around a bunch and then you stop, but the room still seems like it's spinning, or you still seem like it's moving. You've got your vestibular fluid spinning around in there, and so until it stops spinning, you're going to feel dizzy. Concerning pain, biologically, here is what is happening. You have what are called nociceptors, which are special sensory receptors that respond to potentially damaging stimuli that send an impulse to the spinal cord, which passes that info to the brain, and it's interpreted as pain. Okay, so like too much pressure, like stubbing your toe or paper cut, right? Those nociceptors kick in. They're like, whoa, 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 too much stimulation of sensory receptors is happening. We've got to intervene and remove, ourselves from that situation that's causing pain. Biologically, the nerve fibers that are doing this can be divided up into A delta fibers versus C fibers. Your A delta fibers are the ones that register sharp, intense pain, like a good old paper cut, versus C fibers that are more of a long-lasting duller pain. The reason why is that the A delta fibers actually have a myelin sheath and the C fibers don't. That's why it's like a slower, dulling pain. And so if you've ever wondered, like, why does this teeny tiny little paper cut sometimes hurt more than, ramming your, arm into a door frame, where you just kind of rub it and think, oh, that's going to bruise up later. It's just having to do with which sensory receptors have been stimulated. And so come ready to class to discuss this, because we'll talk all about like the psychological reasons that you can distract pain, and the sociocultural expectations that make pain different for everyone. So thanks for listening.